Syria faces a critical shift as armed factions push into Aleppo and government forces retreat, escalating violence across the region. In Gaza, international criticism grows over Israel's military actions and aid restrictions amid a worsening humanitarian crisis. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Zelensky proposes a diplomatic strategy to reclaim Crimea, challenging NATO and regional dynamics. The Syrian army has secured several key areas in northern Hama, including Qalat al-Madiq and Mardas, after driving out armed groups, according to a military source quoted by the state media. The source added that defensive lines in the region have been strengthened to prevent any militant breaches. Meanwhile, our correspondent reported the withdrawal of armed factions from the town of Al-Halfaya, north of Hama, coinciding with the continued arrival of reinforcements to Syrian army positions on the city's outskirts. Now, to provide us with more details about the most recent updates in Syria, we're joined from Cairo by Dr. Mohammed Osman, an international relations expert. Good evening to you, sir, and welcome to Qnews.
Thank you, Mona, for having me.
Thank you so much. And from your point of view, why and what are the key factors behind the sudden advance of the armed factions into the central Aleppo, and how is that affecting the Syrian army's positions?
Syria has been struggling for over 13 years with an internal conflict, or a variety of internal conflicts, actually. A conflict that essentially left over 600,000 people dead and 13 million Syrians displaced in Syria and abroad. So it's quite understandable to see why Syria has become such a fragile state at the moment. Even though there was a lull in the fighting in Syria over the past 4 years, since 2020, approximately, the front in Syria was reignited once more by the Syrian militants or the armed factions in northern Syria when they launched a full-scale offensive against the governorate of Aleppo. And for further perspective, so that we can understand, Aleppo is Syria's second largest city, and it is the economic capital of Syria. So now, with it being most of the governorate of Aleppo and as well as the city under the control of these militants, it's quite a huge blow to the Syrian government and the Syrian armed forces, unfortunately. And what led to this is Syria's main sources of support, regionally and globally, namely Iran and Russia, have been preoccupied with other conflicts and other crises in the region and in the world. So, for example, Iran has its own debacle it has been stuck in regarding the wars in Gaza and Lebanon, and Russia has been preoccupied with the war in Ukraine. So this led to maybe a decline in the capabilities and the support system of the Syrian armed forces. And about the timing is quite strange, to be honest, because it serves many regional and global agendas that I can dwell upon later on.
Exactly, and this is exactly the point that we want to pinpoint our fingers on. The current situation in Syria and whether or not it is linked to regional dynamics, instabilities that is surrounding the ongoing Israeli conflict.
Of course, the 7th of October and its aftermath was a watershed moment in the regional situation, or in the Middle East region, in terms of geopolitical developments and security developments as well. And it basically ignited each and every dormant conflict in the region, apparently including the Syrian war now. And that is because of the altering balance of power and the changing power dynamics in the Middle East itself. So Syria, the Syrian government, is a major component of the so-called Iranian axis. It is an ally of Iran. Iran supported the Syrian government in the war against terrorist groups and armed militias. So now Iran was preoccupied supporting Hezbollah, and Hezbollah itself was a major proponent of the pro-government forces in Syria for the past 13 years. So now with Hezbollah basically relocating most of its units back to Lebanon, to fend off an Israeli invasion that was taking place up until a few days ago. And now there is a fragile ceasefire in Lebanon, and it could collapse at any moment. So with this taken into perspective, we have to understand that Iran's overstretched resources rendered it unable to provide the adequate support needed for the Syrian government so that they can withhold and fend off and push away such an attack or an offensive by the armed factions of Idlib and the north, these extremist factions, of course. And at the same time, it's important to understand the relationship between Israel and some of these armed factions in Syria. And this is something this is not a secret, this is not a conspiracy theory, this is something that was spoken of by former senior Israeli officials, including a former Israeli head of Mossad, who admitted that they have lended support to some of these armed factions in southern Syria at some point of the war in their fight against Hezbollah and the Syrian armed forces. So there is some sort of relationship. I'm not saying that Israel gave a green light or that Israel had a role to play in the militant attack on northern Syria, on Aleppo, and later on Hama. However, I see that these developments serve Israel as it weakens Iran's hold or Iran's ties to its allies in the region, and Iran's capabilities, potentially Iran's capabilities to supply Hezbollah in Lebanon. So I see it as way too convenient for Israel that this is to take place right now at a moment where they are trying to besiege Hezbollah and deprive it of all of its sources of funding on arms, predominantly from Iran, of course. So it's quite interesting to see how this is serving their agenda. Another country that is benefiting from this in some way is Turkey. Turkey has supported these armed factions in northern Syria and has provided them with support over the past few years. And Turkey was seeking to normalize its relationship with Syria. However, Syria placed a very serious condition that it will not normalize relations with Turkey unless Turkey withdraws its troops from northern Syria, because this is an illegal occupation. So maybe, who knows, the Turks may have given the green light to these militants to attack and reopen the Syrian front once more, to exercise more leverage and more pressure and apply more pressure on the Syrian government so that they can give them the necessary concessions that can make them deal with their security concerns concerning Kurdish separatists inside Turkey and inside Syria.
Dr. Osman, you mentioned the timing. And you mentioned the surroundings or the abouts of the whole situation in the Middle East. And you mentioned that the timing serves the interests of Israel. How is that exactly? And is it coincidence, the statements of the Israeli Prime Minister right before the attack of the militants on Idlib, and how in the same time Russia is responding to the latest escalation in Syria?
Well, for the first half of your question, of course, Israel, I wouldn't go as far as saying that Israel orchestrated this or that it had a direct role in planning this militant offensive, because this would be pure speculation. We do not have any reliable evidence that would support that. However, we can say that Israel is benefiting from that with absolute certainty, that they are the ones who will benefit the most from destabilizing Syria and curtailing Iranian influence and what they see as Iranian influence in Syria. Because Syria serves as the land bridge between Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon. So severing or hampering the security and the continuity of the flow of weapons and material and supplies from Iran to Hezbollah serves Israel, especially that the fragile ceasefire in Lebanon might collapse at any moment in the next 60 days, and we might be back to square one. But this remains to be seen, of course. So Israel stands to benefit from that, and I think this way, as I told you, that's the only way I'm willing to put it. Actually, it's way too convenient for Israel. To be honest. On the other hand, as for the Russian predicament, what happened also serves the United States and NATO in the war by proxy against Russia in Ukraine. The Ukrainian war is entering a very decisive phase right now. And Russia is advancing in eastern Ukraine and in southern Ukraine and is securing victory after victory and is improving its battlefield
Yes,
situation.
very much clear what you're speaking about. Briefly, before we go, Dr. Osman, let me ask you, what is needed from the international community at this very particular time, and what is needed by world bodies like the UN and the definitely the Arab League and all the involved partners in the region?
Many Arab countries have expressed support for Syria and the war against terrorism, and this is a war against terrorism. In my view, these are terrorist movements. So, including Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Iraq, and many other countries have pledged support. The United Nations, the European Union, the West, they need to take into consideration that Syria now is fighting factions that include international terrorist organizations like HTS, Jabhat Tahrir or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is an affiliate of Al-Qaeda, and it is an international terrorist organization. So taking this into perspective, the international community should provide all the means of political and military and security and economic support to the Syrian government in their fight against terrorism, and to put aside all of the political calculations and the geopolitical calculations that might make them see otherwise, or that might make them see that Syria is part of a larger war by proxy between the West and Russia.
Right. That was Dr. Mohammed Osman, an international relations expert from Cairo. Thank you so much for your special insights. And shifting from serious escalating violence, we turn to the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza. The New York Times has reported that the former Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon has accused Israel of committing war crimes and ethnic cleansing in Gaza, especially in northern areas like Jabalia. This rare criticism from a senior figure comes amid increasing global scrutiny of Israel's military operations. Ya'alon condemned the Israeli government's actions, stating that they lead to occupation, annexation, and the displacement of Palestinians. He also warned that the Israeli commanders in Gaza could face International Criminal Court lawsuits over their conduct. These accusations were swiftly rejected by Prime Minister Netanyahu's allies, who deemed them harmful and defamatory, as Israel faces growing international pressure over the Gaza crisis. Providing us with more analysis about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, we're joined from Gaza by Bassem Zakhout, the director of the Medical Relief Society in Gaza Strip. Good evening to you and welcome on Qnews. Now, how do you assess Israel's justification for killing a charity worker in Gaza, labeling him a Hamas member without evidence? This is not the first one, by the way, and will not be the last.
Isn't that clear? Can you please repeat the question?
Again, my question is, how do you assess the justification of Israel that it had killed a charity worker in Gaza and labeled him as a Hamas member with no evidence? And he was one of many of those organizations working in the Palestinian occupied territories.
The aggressions against the human relief organizations are to continue since the aggression, and it's not the first time to target the workers of the relief that are increasing. Lately, there are several aggressions against local and international organizations working under the cover of facilitating their works. And today,
hello?
in the Universal Kitchen organizations.
Right, Mr. Bassam, with World Central Kitchen halting its operations, what impact does Israel's interference with aid organizations have on Gaza's humanitarian crisis?
The aggression of the World Universal Kitchen that has a great impact of the situation in the Gaza Strip. The Universal Kitchen is helping thousands of families on a daily basis through the fast foods and meals or through programs along with the working organizations and to remedy the malnutrition for the children. The kitchen has more than societal kitchens working through the Gaza Strip, and today stopped its work, and we don't know when. I don't know if they wish to get a frank guarantee to continue the work. As I understood, they do not understand why this type of aggression isn't only related as justified with Israel previously against the foreign workers of the Universal Kitchen, and then they think that Israel is targeting them and that they have the right to guarantee their protection in order to resume their work freely.
Yes, Mr. Bassam, from your point of view, can the people of Gaza overcome the escalating health crisis, particularly with the ongoing winter and the destruction of infrastructure under the Israeli siege and attacks?
We are living in the most difficult humanitarian crisis throughout the citizens of the Gaza Strip. There's a crisis of hunger. I've seen men are crying while they are in a row waiting for bread, and everyone does not see a grip of a survive for the sickness of demanding food, and they are moving from kitchen to another, and they are not able to get this aid due to the lack of potentials. They are in an absolute besieged for more than 50 days, and even the ships are not entering easily, and if they are not regaining the work from the UNRWA or from the Universal Kitchen, so we'll have a great suffering compared to what's happening today in the Gaza Strip to continue the famine that has started with the starvation war, and the crisis will be doubled upon the beginning of decimating the spread of several diseases due to that aggression. And I think, according to the report, there is an increase of the number of the deaths, among them which due to, from the women and the premature infants, and also the dead from the chronic diseases due to the malnutrition that all the people from the Gaza Strip are suffering now.
Yes, it's very clear what you're saying here, and obviously seen also by footages and video. That was Mr. Bassam Zakout, the director of the Medical Relief Society in Gaza Strip. Thank you so much for your insights. And now from Gaza's deepening crisis, we explore Ukraine's bold diplomatic efforts to reclaim Crimea. The Independent shed light on a pivotal moment in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Former UK Ambassador Sir Tony Brinton described Zelensky's proposal to cede territories temporarily in exchange of NATO's membership as a major concession to Russia. This potential shift highlights the challenge Ukraine faces as it navigates military and political realities. Meanwhile, Moscow's steady gains in Ukraine's east reflect its resilience on the battlefield, reinforcing its strategic objectives. As this situation unfolds, the global focus remains on whether such proposals can lead to meaningful progress towards resolving this protracted conflict. And to discuss these developments, we are joined by Dr. Olga Krasniak, Professor of International Relations from Moscow. Good evening to you. Dr. Krasniak, how realistic is Zelensky's plan to reclaim Crimea through diplomacy, given Russia's firm control over the region?
Well, it seems to me that any proposal which is coming from Mr. Zelensky, who, by the way, basically his presidential term has been expired last May, any of his proposals just only for the sake of proposals, because they have no real ground. So now, before the change of administration in the United States, he proposes once again, so being part of NATO, so without the territories which now are controlled by Russia. But I do not see, so this option can be taken either NATO countries or, of course, nor Russia, because for Russia, for Ukraine, just only one option, one way. It's been a totally neutral country, being a demilitarized country. And for the Western countries, for NATO alliance, so definitely having an opportunity or even a potential threat or a conflict or a risk of escalating a conflict with Russia because a part of Ukraine wants to be part of NATO, definitely it's not an option, I believe.
Now, what are the potential risks and or rewards of Zelensky's proposal to secure NATO membership for the unoccupied Ukrainian territories?
Well, we might suggest, or hypothetically, if this happens, well, I do not believe this happens, so that Ukraine will be part of NATO. So, but if this will happen, so definitely it could be NATO bases in Ukraine, in Ukrainian territory. Then, as a preparation of teaching or training militarily of Ukrainian soldiers by NATO countries. So, and this intensification of military conflict or tensions with Russia will only rise. So, definitely, so even we consider this option, or if this option will be considered, but I do not believe it will happen. So it will be 100% of the escalation of the conflict with Russia. So, but it's not because of Russia against Western countries, so NATO countries, but it's about Russia cannot consider its being a part of Ukraine as a part of NATO or even somehow controlled by NATO countries. So we consider this as an existential threat. That is why.
Now, Georgia's delayed EU membership bid has been linked to appeasing Moscow. From your point of view, how would that impact Ukraine's diplomatic and regional dynamics?
I'm believing that Georgia and Ukraine, so they are played in the hands of Western countries. They promise NATO membership, or they give certain opportunity to maybe to somehow to make these countries a part of European Union. But it's not just only. It is not going to the real terms. It's not going to be real plans because it just only is a way to somehow to bother Russia.
Right.
It's just only to make Georgia and Ukraine, just to make damage to Russia using these countries. So it's not in their own interest, and they must consider. It's something what we see now in Georgia. We see this country does not want to be a part of European Union anymore because they understand how they are played in the hands of European Union.
Your point here is clear, Dr. Olga. Thank you so much, Dr. Olga Krasniak, for your insights. Ukraine's diplomatic approach to reclaiming territories will be undoubtedly shaping the region's future amid ongoing challenges. I guess that wraps up our episode today for In Focus. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.